making films for me frustrate me a little bit. He's actually giving us an opportunity to revisit what it is we think we know. This wasn't a close-up for him, but that was a close-up for him. And it was just like, then it didn't make sense, but now it makes so much sense to me, you know? In the testing phase, I've got all these lenses laid out in front of me, and I'll start with one lens. And I know what size I want, you know, let's just say roughly I want the close-up to be what they would call a bust. Put the lens on it. If I'm too wide, I'll start to move the camera in. When I find the image itself is the exact expression of what size that I want, I then go and stand on the outside from behind the camera, and I look at how far is the lens from the subject. And if it's this far away, it's not the right lens, right? So that means probably that longer lenses don't really work for me anymore, because I'm more interested in getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. So to me, it brings a certain truthfulness to it. When I watch films that are doing that, I respect the filmmaking more. When I'm watching films where the camera's like halfway across the street, but you still have that same size, I don't have the same connection. I feel like we're too conscious of making film. I'm in that space in my life where making films for me frustrate me a little bit, you know, because they're so intrusive and they have a certain logic to them that feels very counterintuitive to me as a human being, but also as a black man. Like, I feel the process is very hostile. And so I'm trying to find ways to like create more intimacy. I'm trying to find ways to create a more personable experience, but for everybody. And I feel like the more the crew can squeeze in around character, around subject, and create a blanket, create a community around talent, then the process is more legitimate to me. For other image makers, they feel fine, you know, with longer lenses. But for me, I've grown to not. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine and I were asked to go look at an archive of civil rights photographs. There were the images of Malcolm X and there were images of Martin Luther King. And some of the photographers, rock star photographers of the moment, specifically the white photographers of the moment, when it came to Malcolm X, they were shooting Malcolm X from across the room, and you could tell by the lenses, you could see. And I already know what that was about. It wasn't about that they couldn't get close enough. It was that their perception of Malcolm was that Malcolm didn't like white people, so they stood across the room because there was a certain level of fear of Malcolm for them. That wasn't necessarily the same for photographers shooting Martin Luther King. You know what I mean? Some of those photographers felt that because his message seemed passive, that they could get closer to him. And so I looked at that and it really informed. It really said a lot to me about how much I don't want to be afraid. I want to be in more. The politics of making images have influenced me wanting to get closer. Years ago, I watched Roger Deakins give an example of why this wasn't a close-up for him, but that was a close-up for him. And it was just like, then it didn't make sense, but now it makes so much sense to me, you know? Just the way I was taught was like, you know, you never shoot somebody with a 14 millimeter lens that close to their face. But, you know, obviously Chivo has reinvented that for us. You know, I know for us in the film community that the tendency is to say, oh, well, Chivo did it, somebody else can do it. But Chivo's an educator too. He's a teacher. You know what I mean? He's teaching us. Whoever has imparted him with this knowledge, and he's not selfish with the knowledge. He's actually showing us. He's actually giving us an opportunity to revisit what it is we think we know in order to give us a more immersive cinema. And the films that are being made now remind me of the films that Charles Burnett, Haile Gerima, Larry Clark, Julie Dash were making back when, in the films and why those films inspired me, because they were so much closer, you know what I mean? So it wasn't like it was so far away. I'd already had that reference. But the beauty of Chivo and Inarritu is that they brought me back into that consciousness.